slightly cynically, I thought in the back of my mind, well, if you're going to get replaced by a robot, you might as well get in the robot making game.
James is one of the few people in the UK that has a successful traditional IFA practice, but has also built and launched a robo or digital advice journey.
Business we're going to build, it's all going to be great. This is what we're going to do. This is where we're going to start. Cool. How are you going to do it? By this point, my mind has started to get open to the idea that tech has limits. It's not just an infinite source of capability.
James is a partner at Westminster Wealth Management LLP, a really successful traditional IFA practice, but also heads up alladvise.ai, their digital advice proposition. We hear, give it 6 months, AI is going to eat everyone's lunch and there won't be a single financial advisor.
I think for financial advisors, it's going to eat some of their lunch, probably the horrible vegetables.
I really enjoyed this conversation and hope you do too. If you did, please share it with someone who you think might also enjoy it. Thank you. James, welcome to Advice Amplified.
Thank you very much.
You run a really successful, let's call it traditional practice, making money, happy days. You can see a route forward with that. Why go into anything else? Why look at digital advice and serving those, I suppose, smaller AUM clients and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's actually quite a few bits to it. So it's one of those ones where there are some push factors and some pull factors. I think, like every business, regardless of where in the value spectrum you're operating, there are some, you can call them inefficiencies, you can call them problems, you can call them what you like. But it's really, there are some things that come along in our business that we make it less efficient. A classic example being, your wealthiest client comes along and says, they're a great client, you enjoy them, all that sort of stuff. They're profitable for you to service as a client. And they go, I've just given £10,000 to my godson. He's 21. Could you look after him? Well, yes, I can do. But of course, he's an adult. And therefore, I have to treat him as a full client. I can't say no. I could do, but it's slightly disenfranchising for the relationship. So I should really work with him. And but of course, he is instantly an unprofitable client. Or in other words, you're just making your best client less profitable. Wouldn't it be great if we had a solution by which we could somehow make that less human intensive? Alongside that, there's the increased regulatory burden that comes along that has lots of good outcomes for clients, but does take up more advisor time. And then we were also conscious that we get approaches both by way of referral that aren't necessarily financially viable for us as a firm to deal with. And also cold approaches. We were getting tens of cold approaches a month that we couldn't deal with. And it felt, whilst it was strategically important that we didn't engage with them and run them at a loss, it did feel sort of slightly counterintuitive to be turning away clients when certainly when you start your business, you're desperate for any client you can look after. And so we sort of set about on this journey sort of over lockdown of saying, okay, well, let's have a look at this. Is there something we can do here? What does this world look like? All that sort of stuff. And at the same time, in the back of their mind, there's a lot of fear mongering going on of your job's going to get replaced by a robot. Now, we don't write concertos. We're not artists. So, it is within the realms of possibility that we could have our jobs replaced by a robot. And sort of slightly cynically, I thought in the back of my mind, well, if you're going to get replaced by a robot, you might as well get in the robot making game.
Yeah.
And so there's is it really an insurance policy? No, it's not at all. But it was something that I thought, okay, well, actually, people believe this could be done. So I might as well have a look at it myself, because whilst I don't make robots or digital platforms, I do actually know how this job is done. So we should definitely have a look at it. And that sort of evolved over time as we started to look at how we could address this market and go, okay, well, how do we go about building a platform? Where do we really start on this whole thing? There are lots of avenues we can take this. And maybe the initial avenue we looked at wasn't really going to be the one that was actually going to be the most financially viable. Because I think it's all very well and good building a good platform, but as you've seen with the likes of Nutmeg being a great example, they did a lot of advertising on the tube. It worked out incredibly well for them, but even it was a expensive exercise for them. And if you sort of, in my mind, I always sort of thought of the tube as being the battlefield on which all tech platforms died, because actually it's just a marketing spend to acquire clients. And so we had an opportunity by which we could take a digital advice platform in a direction that would serve a large client base that was presented to us who had our advice need. And so that really allowed us to pivot in a viable direction and take that off away from where we initially started, although we still do have our eyes on that, and that is ultimately where we want to get our business to. But to start with, by having a base of clients that we could initially take it to that would make the platform viable, that is the direction that we really went in.
The journey you went on when you made the decision, we're going to do this. You've already mentioned Nutmeg and that opportunity, I guess, to sit back and look at what went right and maybe what went wrong in some of the early forays into robo-advice. I'm really interested in your process in researching, figuring out how you're going to approach this and getting the thing up and running. What did that look and feel like? What were some of the decisions or insights you brought into that process?
Well, initially it was a bit of soul searching. Do I really want to start tabling this as an idea? I'm incredibly fortunate that I sit within a leadership that is very open-minded about how we look at the issues within the firm. And, after a bit of a SWOT analysis of where we could really take this, it was felt that it's something we should explore. But of course, first, the classic is there are two types of people that don't know and people that don't know they don't know. And I was very clear that I was going to be in the category of people that don't know. I know there was a lot of stuff about this I didn't know. So really, it was an initial foray into what does this market look like? I'm not going to be writing code myself, no idea where to start. But actually, who out there could we work with to do this? And we looked at loads of providers in this space or people operating in this space, and it was partly over the tail end of lockdown, so that made it quite a quick process to do. We really encountered a complete spectrum of, we're a startup. We've literally just got some computers. We were thinking about doing this. Why don't we do it together? All the way up to, we're really a DFM with a portal. Hand over your clients and, we'll give you a tenner or something, which, neither spectrum was unappealing. And we ended up going with a provider that had experience in this space and we thought we could really deliver. And, as I previously mentioned, we were looking at targeting a specific section of the market where we had a large need. And we sort of mentioned this along the way. And then it really got to the big meeting. The head of advice was in there, the head of development, a couple of C-suiters, and the person who brought us along the journey. At which point it was abruptly told to me that we wouldn't be taking that avenue forward, but we could do you a general platform, which, say went bad, and in a bad outcome for the meeting would be an understatement. Not my finest moment. But anyway, so that meeting ended pretty abruptly as we couldn't, that was our strategic movement. And so actually it was a phone call on the side from, a chap who said, look, I know that didn't end well, but you should probably go and have a chat with Ningi. They've got experience in this. They've done it before. They will be the direction to go. And that is really how we ended up in that space, is starting out, look, we don't know any of this. Let's start with a really broad spectrum. And that process took a while. That was probably a 10 to a 12-month process of doing that. I look back at it, I'm like, oh, crikey, I really dragged my heels on that. But really, it was all a learning process to sort of narrow it down of what are you looking for in a tech provider? What are you not looking for? Does it meet your strategic aims, where you want to take the business long term, all that sort of stuff. There was a couple of jokes about how many black t-shirts do we wear to these meetings. As you can see, I've still not really adopted that, but that was a really interesting process of saying, where do we start? We really believe you've got to start with the end in mind. So in all of those initial discussions, we were very clear about strategically how we wanted to be positioned in the market at the end of it. What did we want to be true about our business? What did we want to be true about how our clients are serviced? What do we want to be true about the type of advice that we were delivering upon? Having that end in mind really was quite crucial to it, but also realizing very early doors that I wasn't going to be able to do it myself.
Yeah, and you mentioned there, so circling back to, you kind of figured out what you didn't want and what you did want. What were some of those kind of key decision points when you were looking for a provider? I guess with the platforms, it's like, well, you're not going to be able to actually go with us on this journey. So no, we don't want to just buy something off the shelf that's not even fit for purpose.
There were some things that I started to look at that I thought were important at the time that were just me basically making it up for the sake of, trying to feel like I was doing a good, job of it. And there were other bits that as I went along the journey, I realized were more important. Early doors, we really started, we wanted these people to have given advice before, have built an advice platform. But you quite quickly realize that that's not going to happen. Either they're doing it and they just want your clients, which didn't fit with what we wanted, or they haven't done it at all before. And so what we were really looking for was someone who had experience of building a B2C platform with a reasonable degree of complexity. It's not AI, but it's not also Tetris, but also having done that at scale. So building a scalable version. I mean, one of the early conversations we had, we said, okay, this is what we want it to do. Yeah, we can definitely do that. And I can't remember where I saw it. It definitely wasn't my own brilliance that came up with the question. I sort of said, how many people could we put through this, in a week before this starts to fall over? By this point, my mind has started to get open to the idea that tech has limits. It's not just an infinite source of capability. Oh, you could definitely put through 100 people, in a week on this. Right, okay, what if we wanted to make that 1,000 or 10,000 in a week? Oh, no, definitely wouldn't work. Could you build? No, we probably could. Right, okay, fine. So that was an area where I had no concept of that initially being a problem, where I was suddenly like, oh, right, actually, when you really want to scale this, and there'll be lots of journeys, might not be 10,000 individual clients, but it might be 10,000 iterations of people going through various parts of the journey, coming back, checking their logins, all this sort of stuff. That I was really beginning to sort of get an understanding and a feel of what are the parameters in building a platform. And then it was, you need enough people in the business for it to not be a one-man band. If the guy gets COVID, which was pretty highly likely at the time, or falls over, all that sort of stuff, that it doesn't shut down. You need to be culturally aligned with them. And by that, I don't mean that actually we both vote for the same political party or whatever it might be. It was more that we looked at development outfits that were not in the UK. And we realized, they could probably do the job fantastically well. They were bright, articulate people. They all are. But actually simple things like, do you understand how a pension works? Probably wasn't, if you've got to spend half your time explaining what your business does and how the products work within it, that's going to really hobble your chances of really taking it forward at pace. So someone who had experience in the financial services sector was always a plus. Essentially we just arrived at a crossroads where we're like, okay, they're big enough as a firm with enough experience in what they're doing, not necessarily as a firm together, but as individuals together, they know what they're doing in space and they understand financial services. Right, we're probably at somewhere where we can now, this feels like the right person to take it forward. And as said previously, doesn't mean it wasn't a risk. You like Ningi took a punt on us, we took a punt on Ningi. The punt turned out to be very well founded. But at the time, you're like, right, I'm working with a company I've never worked with before in a space I've tangentially got experience in, but really it's the tech bit I've got no experience in. How do I make that whole thing work?
So thinking about it, you spend some time figuring out, is this the right thing to do, doing a SWOT analysis and figuring out who's the right partner and kind of exploring that. What was the next step? And I suppose that is build it, get cracking. And what were some of the things that were a surprise, I guess, or you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, so once we'd actually worked out who we were going to do it with, and we knew what we wanted the business to look like at the back end, you sort of done all, not the time, but what turned out to be, you'd done all the easy stuff. And you quite quickly, you get into the room and you go like, right, this is the business we're going to build. It's all going to be great. This is what we're going to do. This is where we're going to start. Cool. How are you going to do it? And then that suddenly went from, okay, what I've brought to the table so far is a plan and a vision of how I want to do it and some modicum of research to get us to this point, to suddenly I have to go from financial advisor in my brain, doing the exams, giving advice, making a compliant file, writing it up, all the things we have to do as, financial advisors, which is essentially just in my head, to suddenly I need to be able to articulate this, how I do it and how I would solve this advice need in a manner that someone who doesn't give financial advice probably knows what a pension is, in this case did know what a pension is, but definitely doesn't give financial advice, and actually turn that into code that then works for a coherent journey to be consumed by someone who doesn't know how financial advice works, who probably is not very confident on their finances in an area that they don't feel very confident with, and they consume it, feel confident, trust the system, and receive regulated advice. And that was a slightly squeaky bum moment, where you go, oh, right, right, I've got, this is actually the pointy end of the wedge here. How do we do this? And for that, what I came to realize was that being able to articulate that was really being able to articulate in a flowchart to go, right, client walks in the room, how do I actually give advice? What do I really do? Other than introducing myself, I'll start with a financial profile. So I will ask them questions. Depending on the answers I receive back will depend on the advice that I'm going to give them. Now, when you're giving holistic financial advice, you don't actually know when you start that profile what the advice you're going to give is. So that's, you've got to be a bit more dynamic in your thinking about it. But obviously in the digital routes, you know when the journey that they are proceeding on, you know roughly what they're getting come here for advice for, because that was our initial route to market. So we were able to target our questions down to actually create an environment by which we could ask the right questions. And it's then saying, okay, I've asked the right question for really the advice these people want. What I now need to do is work out what my reaction in the way I give advice. How does my brain then say, okay, that changes the way that I would give advice? And there are lots of these journeys that go on. And, there are some very, very bright advisors out there who can really do this. I won't pass comment as to where I think I am on that spectrum. Probably in the bottom. It's something when you do your job over and over again, you get very good at. You don't need to be a genius to do it. You can just get very good at doing any repetitive task. Any complex task with repetition becomes a repetitive task. And so you get very good at doing that in your mind, but you don't think about it. Suddenly you're having to really deconstruct how you think about it and create a route by which you can you can map out how you actually give advice to that person on the multiple complex scenarios, and then articulate that to a development team. Now, as it turned out, I absolutely love whiteboarding. That I found was a really good way of doing it. And maybe it comes from when I first started in financial services, there's lots of drawing pictures on paper to articulate to clients how a pension worked, or so on and so forth. But it's I found that really helped me map it out, and helped actually the people who were consuming that map, in this case developers, understand the way it worked. They could take a photo of it, go away, think about it, and create a flow by which you could then logically go through the journey with a different set of answers to the questions we would ask, and see what recommendation you would end up providing to the client, and then test that in a compliant fashion. Actually take it to external compliance consultants and our internal compliance guys and say, right, have a look at this. This was the fact find. This was the advice outcome. Does that make sense? And so you've already built your engine before you've actually even started coding. And so that was absolutely how we took the next step. And that was the really hard bit. The next step is, once that's initially done, built, is then testing it. Testing it I find really hard, because you have to go through the same thing over and over again, looking for something that might be different. And then you've really got something you can take to market. Once you've tested it internally with tech team, tested it externally with just general users and people who are good at spotting mistakes, and then tested it again with compliance, you've got something that can put a live client in and produce a regulated piece of advice that not only you are proud of, but you're willing to be liable for. And as a firm, that's a bit of a leap. And so that was really the journey behind doing it.
So I feel like we could talk for days on this. It's super, super interesting stuff. And
I could.
And I think the journey you've gone on, there's so few that have and got to this point as well. So it's, there's a lot of insight and learning in there. To round things off and ask you one final question, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on where the industry will be in kind of 5 or 10 years. We hear sometimes that give it 6 months, AI is going to eat everyone's lunch and there won't be a single financial advisor. We also hear there's no way this can be automated. It's a really personal role. And I think you sit with really interesting perspective on probably both of those opinions.
To really butcher your analogy of AI is going to eat everyone's lunch, I think for financial advisors, it's going to eat some of their lunch. Probably the horrible vegetables. That's not to say it's going to take away the health from you, but I think it's going to eat the stuff you didn't really want to eat on your plate anyway. I think when I think of financial advice and technology, I think of it a bit like a tailor. There will always be a market for people wanting to go and get a bespoke suit made, measured up for them, that they feel confident with, they've got a relationship with, and they know what is getting delivered is exactly what they want. There will always be that space. Now, it might move further up the wealth spectrum for financial advisors, but I also believe that technology can really take away a lot of the stuff that really takes up a lot of advisory time, be that meeting your regulatory obligations in communicating with your clients, updating financial profiles, making sure all your records are up to date, doing your own compliance, making simple things like recording CPD quicker and easier and, more up to date, all that sort of thing. I think it can take a lot of that admin time away, typing up client notes, making sure they're added to files, all that sort of thing. I think it can really improve that, which will have, I think, a bit of a split of actions. What I hope will happen is it'll allow advisors to go, cool, I've actually got a bit more time on my hands. I can now spend more time with the clients I want to spend time with, so I can either get better at what I'm doing, get more technical, deliver a much higher quality level of service in the same way that a bespoke suit is really a piece of art because can dedicate the time and attention to it. Or I can just deliver more of the other stuff that the client really wants. I can basically, I've got more client-facing time on my hands. The other thing is they might just say, well, I'll just do less work. That might happen. Of course, people are entitled to do that. But I certainly think the industry will get better and better. And I think as the sort of somewhat unfairly termed rising tide of qualification continues, people will get more qualified. They will just get better at it, knowing that actually they don't have to spend the time doing it. They've got the time to do the learning, to put in the hours, to deal with more complex cases, put in the time. And I think, face-to-face advisors will become profitable is probably the wrong word, but I think they'll spend more time dealing with the clients they want to deal with. But I also think they will have the capacity through technology to deal with more clients they don't want to deal with face-to-face, because technology can really support that. And I think that technology will also provide greater continuity for relationships of advisors with clients. So you might be able to have more than one advisor service a client because technology can record more of the nuances of the relationship. The record keeping is more up to date. Everything's summarized quicker, all that sort of stuff. So I think clients are going to get a much better service, both at the bottom end in terms of actually being able to get advice. I think that's really important. But I think for the traditional advisor who wants to deal with a client of a certain wealth spectrum, they're going to be better enabled to do it because they're just going to have more time.
That's a really, really interesting insight. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
You're more than welcome.